for you guys. Thank you. Volunteers make the community go round. I know this. Thank you. Okay, so I don't know how many of you were here in the last session, but we had Emma giving a lovely talk about data science with Data the Dash Hound, and they're making me follow that. There are pictures all over Twitter. And so I just thought in the spirit of inclusiveness, I needed to redress the balance a little bit, because guess what? Cat people, we're part of the community too. And so I'd like to just introduce you to, this is Dr. Amy Jones on the left, and Professor Death, aka Petey, on the right. And they're here, no, they're not here. They're not here in the audience, not like Data was. This is all the cat content I actually have for you, so don't worry. I just wanted to be clear, we are here, we are part of the community too. Actually today, I am here to talk to you about my journey with serverless, which sounds really fancy. And like many journeys that originate in Australia, my journey starts with an airplane. Actually, a whole bunch of airplanes. Many of you who know me know that before I worked at AWS, I worked for a company called Yao, which conveniently has a booth out here. And so Yao put on tech events all around the APAC region. And so my job at Yao was to spend a lot of time on airplanes. And I would go to cities. I would go to Perth. I'd go to Brisbane, Hobart, Singapore, Hong Kong. And in every city, I'd want to talk to developers. I'd want to find out what problems they were facing, what technologies they were excited about, what experts we could bring that would be really interesting to them. And you know, and I know that the best place to have those conversations are events like today, tech meetups, tech conferences. That's the best place to actually engage. So I'd book a trip to a city, and then I'd want to know what events were on, and that's where I'd run into a problem, because there's really no central repo for that information. I mean, yes, there's meetup.com, which is kind of, we know, become the default, but it's not a great experience, is it? Like, you can go and type in a city and search for groups near a city, and then you can laboriously click through each one to see if there are any events on that you might want to go to. But it's kind of a clunky UI, it's not great. And before you say it, yes, I know there are calendars they have that you can subscribe to, but they're actually only showing events for groups that you're already in, which kind of defeats the point of discovery if I have to already be in the group, which incidentally is why I'm in like 500 meetup groups. So what I really wanted was I just wanted a simple calendar that I could subscribe to that would show me the events on in a given city. And then one day the light bulb went off because I discovered that Meetup has an API. And I thought, oh, self, you could write some code that would go to the Meetup API, would pull down all the groups in a city, loop through them, get all the events, format that into a calendar, and then dump it into your shared web hosting, right? So I did what any good, lazy developer would do. I went to GitHub to see if anybody had already done this before, and nobody had. But I did find a PHP library for interacting with the Meetup API, and so I started from that because I'm lazy. So I started from that library, and I started adding in all the loops, all the transformation, all the functionality to create this calendar, format the calendar to upload it and everything. And I went, great, cool. Here's my beautiful code. I tested it, works great. And I'm gonna now chuck that over the wall. I'm gonna give it to the ops team, to the sysadmin, and say, Mr. Sysadmin, could you please run this? Please put this on a server and do whatever it is you people do, and make it run once a day, and give me the end result, thank you. And lest you think I'm super fancy that I have my own sysadmin on call, I should mention I'm married to him. And that the server in question sat on a shelf in a closet in our house surrounded by crap. But he dutifully did the needful. He put the code on the machine, he set it up to run every day. And the weird thing is it kind of worked. Like, it uploaded the calendar to my shared web host, and I could subscribe to that calendar, and it had events on it. Life is great. Except every now and then I would notice like it hadn't updated for a couple days, and then or like some event would be corrupted, and I'd realize there was a bug and everything, and so I'd go and I'd raise a sev 2, you know, kick the sysadmin a little bit, and we'd find out, like, for example, one time, well, honey, the hard disk filled up with scraped World of Warcraft auction house data. I don't know how that happened. Exactly. So needless to say, the whole scenario was pretty flaky, and he was getting a little annoyed at having to support it. But I didn't have the skills to manage the server myself, and what's more, frankly, I didn't want to. Didn't want to do it. I just wanted to take my code, put it somewhere, and have it run. Is that too much to ask? And then one day, like Luke hearing Obi-Wan's voice at the end of Star Wars, I heard a voice in my head say, "There's no server better than no server." So this, as many of you know, is Werner Vogels, who's the CTO of Amazon. And this is when he was introducing our serverless compute service, AWS Lambda, at reInvent 2014. Now 2014, that was 5 long years ago. So show of hands, how many of you in the room are familiar with, who have played with Lambda? Yeah, cool. Now keep your hand up if you are running something on Lambda in production. Okay, a few, cool. Some hands went down. I kind of expected that. All right. Now for those of you who didn't raise your hand at all, or who are secretly squirming because you don't understand how something can be serverless when it runs code on the internet, I'm gonna give you just the one slide, I swear, just one slide introduction, okay? So serverless computing allows you to build applications and services without having to worry about servers. Yes, your application code is still running on a server somewhere, you just don't have to care about it. The analogy that I really like when explaining this to the muggles is that it's like calling takeaway food kitchenless, okay? I don't have to worry about provisioning servers or installing operating systems or patching them or databases or storage systems, I don't have to worry so much about fault tolerance and availability because the service provider just magically handles that for you. As a developer, all you have to do is write your code, upload it, set up some triggers, and they'll take care of the rest. And if you set aside the code for a moment, really serverless is all about giving you more agility, more business agility. We in the cloud business, we like to talk about the undifferentiated heavy lifting of managing servers. And really, what this means is you have more time to focus on delivering value to your customers, to your users, which remember, in this case, was actually me. So this all sounds really too good to be true, right? And that is actually, in fact, what I thought when I first was introduced to serverless computing. And that brings us to Erwin. To Erwin van der Koog, right down here in the front row. Erwin is a Melburnian, he is one of your own. And this here is the actual day that I learned about serverless. This is Erwin van der Koog presenting at Yow West in Perth in 2016. He gave a talk called Look Ma No Servers. And he showed how you could build a banking application using AWS Lambda. And that is the back of my head, right there. That is the back of my actual head, watching him as he told me, very excitedly and with a straight face, that serverless computing, Kris, was going to completely change the world of software development. And would you like to see what my face looked like when he said that? Yeah, you're dreaming, mate, is what I was thinking. A bank? Really? A bank's gonna use this toy that you're presenting? Yeah, sure, pull the other one. But over the years, I learned more and more about this technology. I started hearing about the companies that were using it, like Netflix, like we've got the Cloud Guru team here. They're running their whole stack on serverless. And I started to think, hey, maybe this could solve my meetup calendar problems, And I should add that the sysadmin was very much in favor of me outsourcing my server management. So last year, I decided to just take the plunge, to give it a go, and to migrate my PHP calendar application to serverless. So this right here is the very first version of my architecture. It is the simplest thing in the world. And this was essentially me just taking that PHP monolith and porting it to Node.js. And I did that for the sole reason that PHP wasn't supported. And again, I found a Node library on GitHub that I could start from. So what I did, every day it would begin with a CloudWatch event. Now CloudWatch is our monitoring and observability service, but the cool thing is you can use it to trigger Lambdas. Basically think cron job, okay? So a cron job would fire off in the morning and call this get events Lambda, and that would go up to the Meetup API, and it would put all the groups and all the cities I wanted, format them into a calendar, and then put that into an S3 bucket. That's our storage service, and you can set that up to serve as a static website, which I did, and I put CloudFront in front of it as a CDN. And this, simple, but it actually worked. It worked okay. It worked great when I was testing it with only a few groups, and then I got cocky. I was like, oh, the power. I'm gonna parallelize hundreds of requests to Meetup. This thing will be blazing fast, right? And you can imagine what happened next. Yeah, pro tip, third-party providers really don't like it when you just hammer their services. So if anyone's from Meetup, really sorry about that. It turns out that Lambda is actually, in this case, too darn efficient. I need to figure out a way to slow it down, to actually slow down the requests so that I wouldn't get throttled by the Meetup API. So I went back to what I should have done in the beginning, and I refactored the whole thing into 3 separate functions. So this is version 2 of the architecture. So again, we kick off with a CloudWatch event, and I'd actually kick off 5 cron jobs every morning. Each one would pass in the name of a city to the first Lambda, which was called Get Groups. And that would go up to the Meetup API, and it would give it the city, and it would give it a whole bunch of topic IDs for various tech-related topics, and it would get back a list of groups, like all the Meetup groups in Melbourne. And it would store those in SQS, that simple queue service. That's a service that we have that allows you to decouple microservices, allows you to store and receive messages. So I was using it as a place to dump that list of groups. Now the second Lambda there, get events. This was also on a cron job, but this one ran once a minute, every minute, 24/7. And that was strictly to spread out those requests. So every time that one would fire up, it would look at the queue and see if there were any groups. If there were, it would take one off. Let's say Melb.js, that's a meetup, I've been there. And it would then go to the Meetup API and say, do you have the next 10 events for Meetup for Melb.js? It would get those and then store them in a DynamoDB database. So that's our simple NoSQL database service. So it would process all of those. And then the third Lambda would again be called with a series of cron jobs at the end of the day, each one with a city. And those would take all of the events for a city out of the database, format the calendar, whack them in S3, just as before. Now this worked great. I had no problem with this. This ran for many, many months, was working fine, but I didn't like it. And it was that one in the middle, that one that ran every minute that I didn't like, you know? We talk a lot about event-driven architectures, and that's not event-driven. You know, that running every minute. And to give you an idea of the numbers here, I was tracking about 400 meetup groups across Australia. So that meant there were 400 groups going into SQS every day. And that meant that the first 400 times that get events Lambda ran, it would get a group and it would go off and do the thing. And then the next 1,000 times per day, it would fail. It would spin up, oh, queue's empty, do nothing. And the thing is, it wasn't costing me anything. You know, one of the really cool things about Lambda is you get 1 million free requests a month, so it's not like it was costing me anything. It just bothered me, you know, it wasn't particularly nice. We want things to be elegant. What I really wanted is I wanted that second Lambda to be triggered off events going into the queue, groups going into the queue, and then I wanted it to stop when the queue was empty. And fortunately last year we actually introduced using SQS triggers for Lambda, and eventually I figured out how to make that happen. So this was version 3 of my architecture. This is where the very small change, but that middle Lambda, get events, is no longer being called by a cron job. Instead it's being called directly when groups go into the SQS queue, that triggers it and it runs. And so what I've done, just side note for those who know a little bit more about Lambda, to make that possible is on the get groups Lambda, when it puts them into SQS, I've set a visibility delay of 1 second on each group. And so that actually yeah, Gabe, did you give me that advice? Somebody did. It spaces them out by 1 second. And so that is enough that I don't trip on Meetup's rate limiting there. And I also, on get events, I have a concurrency limit set to 1. That means that there's only allowed to be 1 of that middle Lambda actually processing events off the queue at any given time. And so that seems to work really great. I'm also storing the rate limit headers I get back from Meetup so I can debug if I need to. You want to see it work, right? Let's do a demo. Yes. Oh, cool. All right, I have a bunch of tabs here, which equate to those boxes you just saw. So this first one, get groups, this is that first Lambda that runs every day. And so I've actually got a test cron job set up. And anybody from Canberra in the room? Yeah, oh hey, I don't actually track Canberra in my calendar, so I'm using you as the test bed for today. So you can see I'm passing in Canberra here as the city. So we're going to kick off this test event. And that's going to Meetup, and it's getting down all the tech Meetup groups in Canberra. And if my Wi-Fi holds up, yeah, boom, we're done. And so that actually pulled down 21 different groups. You can see them there. There's Our Ladies Canberra, there's a few. And those have gone into SQS, which is our second tab. So if I refresh quickly, you'll see messages delayed? Those are those messages that are spaced out by 1 second. So they're not actually visible yet to that Lambda that's processing them. But like I said, these are going every 1 second, and they get processed pretty quickly. So look, we're nearly done, actually. And they're pretty much done. There's only one left. So those are being processed in real time by that second Lambda, by get events. So this is the one that's actually taking each SQS group and going to Meetup. And I'm not going to bother demoing it because by now that queue is empty. There's nothing for me to actually test on. Each of those events went into DynamoDB. So if I go here to Dynamo, and you can see I've got a query for looking for Canberra, and I'll do a search. And now I've got events for Canberra. So that's because that second Lambda has now populated these into the database. Cool, that will happen throughout the day. Third one is make calendar. And again, my test event is configured for Canberra. And when I go ahead and run that, this is now actually going to make 2 calendars. So when I first built this, I made 1 calendar where every meetup was a separate event. And for cities like Melbourne, where you guys have a really vibrant community, I was putting hundreds of events on my calendar. So then I made a second version called Digest, which was just as a single event per day, which has all of these. All right, so that succeeded, and very happily, it's made both of them. This is my S3 bucket. There's nothing for Canberra there, but if I refresh, I now should have, yes, Canberra. I've got Canberra URL, so let me just grab, not yet, don't clap yet, don't clap yet. So let me copy the URL. Hang on, wait for it. Google Calendar, okay. Any app that allows you to subscribe by calendar, I'm going to go add from URL. I'm going to paste that in, and I actually have my custom domain set up, so I don't need all of that. And I'm going to add calendar. And hey, Canberra person, guess what you have coming up? These are all the events you have coming up in Canberra this month. Yay! Now you can clap. Yes. Like I said, Canberra doesn't have a huge tech community. You guys are so lucky. Let me show you Melbourne. Melbourne. Boom. You had 28 events on the other day. Like, it is just, wow, really good. All right, we can switch back to the presentation now. Cool. But I'm not done yet. So I actually went back last week and I refactored some more because I didn't like those 5 cron jobs kicking off for the first Lambda and the last Lambda. I wanted to be a bit more simple and automated, so I went back and I used step functions. This was really fun. So now I've got a new Lambda called Get Cities. And so every day I kick off Get Cities. It goes to DynamoDB, a configuration table, and pulls down some data, including a list of the cities I want to support, and then it loops through them, and it calls Get Groups on each of those cities. So now I only have to call that once. And so I do that for both the getting the groups and for making the calendars. And I've put in a 5-second space just to space it out a little bit. I'm trying to keep Meetup happy. And then everything else works as before. And so this is now the version 4 of the architecture with that. So as I said, only 1 cron job needed now for Get Groups, only 1 needed for Make Calendar. And the other really cool thing about it is since I'm now storing the cities in a database, I can build a configuration front end on top so that I can add more cities in without having to go in and change the code, which is actually next on the roadmap. So this is my roadmap here. So like I said, I've been playing around with Amplify and Cognito to build a little front end so that I can configure my little app. I also want to use the developer tools. Like, I started this project when I was at Yale, so this is a personal project. This is not something I've done in my AWS account. It's something I'm paying for. And so I want to try and actually, dog food our developer tools. And so I use the Cloud9 IDE, use Code Pipeline to do my builds. I'm really excited. And since I have a whole database full of events, how cool would it be to build an Alexa skill? Who wouldn't want to say, hey Alexa, when's the next Melt.js? Cool. And I have put the code up on GitHub, but there's obviously a lot of parts you got to coordinate, so I really want to do a CloudFormation stack so that you can just hit a button and deploy this yourself. I've made a couple other improvements under the hood. I'm not really going to go into it in depth, but like for example, Meetup recently discontinued their API keys, so I had to figure out how to implement OAuth, which meant that I needed to store my Meetup credentials somewhere that I could update them. So I'm now storing them in AWS Systems Manager Parameter Store. I'm encrypting them with KMS, with Key Management Service. And just recently I got Lambda layers working that we brought out at reInvent last year. And so all the common node dependencies I'm using across those Lambdas, I've pulled out into a layer. It just simplifies things a little bit. Oh, you might want to know how much this thing costs, right? Must be super expensive. It has cost me $10.48 for the last year. And that's actually a slight overestimation because I've got a personal website and some other things running in that S3 bucket as well. And by far the biggest cost is just 50 cents a month for my custom domain name. If you would like to subscribe to the calendars, because these are available, you are welcome to use them. Take a picture of this. So that has the URLs for the 2 Melbourne calendars, or the QR code will take you to my GitHub, which has the URLs for all 5 of the cities. And also, pull requests welcome. Would love to have some help on this. I need to update the documentation there. I'm pretty much at the end. I want to leave you with a few tips, because hopefully this inspired you to get going your own journey with serverless. The first tip I have is to scratch an itch. And I mean, if you want to learn a new technology, look, every new technology these days seems to have a tutorial to build a to-do list app. I don't know about you, but I don't care about building a to-do list app. I want to do something that actually solves the problem I'm interested in. And this was really helpful for me, and other people told me they found it helpful, which is why I was motivated to actually continue. So find something do something real, as opposed to just doing the tutorials. Next one. I would invite you to not jump straight into migrating your big legacy monolith. It didn't work for me, it probably won't work for you. It's actually best practice that we recommend is start new workloads with serverless, start new apps with serverless. If you do have a big legacy monolith that is like slowing down your business agility, start moving parts of it to serverless, and you can look up the Strangler design pattern if you want more information on that. Invest your time in setting up your local environment, get the SDK for your language of choice, get the command line tools. Like, it's really nice to be able to just very simply run your tests and deploy locally. Just spend a bit of time doing that before you get going. This is my pro tip, because there's some blog posts with some real horror stories for people doing their own Lambda experiments. When you set up a Lambda and you trigger it, never have the Lambda perform an action that could trigger that same action again. So for example, if your Lambda is triggered off a queue, don't have that Lambda add items into the queue, because you can get into a loop very easily and blow through those million requests, and then you'll be in a sorry state. So just be aware of that one. I've seen it trip some people up. And lastly, my advice is start simple and iterate. Like, once I went back to the bare bones, these are the 3 very microservices. It was then trivial for me to start pulling things out into layers and adding in step functions and just making it better. So don't be afraid to go back to the basics. And that's my app. I thought it was a really good one to share with Community Day. I hope you enjoy it, I hope you subscribe, and I hope you'll get out and go to some of the meetups in your community. As you heard, I'm an organizer for mine, and I think that tech meetups are just fantastic places to meet. Thank you. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you, Kris. All right. So if we remember this morning, we're talking about all of the breaking news alerts. We've heard from Team